Story start now. The girl in the blue ribbon. Some memories fade with time. They blur around the edges, losing detail and clarity until you can barely remember if they really happened or if you just dreamed them once. But other memories stay sharp forever. They burn themselves into your mind with such intensity that even decades later, you can recall every single detail with perfect clarity. This is one of those memories. This is something that happened to me when I was 17 years old, back in 1994, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I was not the kind of teenager who believed in ghosts. I was not into anything paranormal or supernatural. I did not read horror books or watch scary movies. I was just a normal 17-year-old girl living a normal life in a normal house. I went to school. I hung out with my friends. I argued with my parents about curfews and homework. I was ordinary in every possible way. That is important because what I am about to tell you is not something I wanted to see, or expected to see, or was looking for. It just happened. And it changed everything I thought I knew about the world. It was a Saturday afternoon in late spring. The kind of perfect day where the sun streams through the windows and makes everything feel warm and alive. School was out for the weekend. My parents had gone somewhere. I cannot even remember where now. Maybe shopping. Maybe visiting relatives. It does not matter. What matters is that I was alone in the house for the afternoon. I loved being home alone back then. Most teenagers do. It meant freedom. It meant being able to do whatever I wanted without parents looking over my shoulder, or telling me to turn down the music or asking me what I was doing. For a few precious hours, the house was entirely mine. I remember going straight to the stereo system as soon as my parents' car pulled out of the driveway. My dad had this really nice setup in the living room. Big speakers. A powerful amplifier. The kind of system that could really fill a house with sound when you cranked it up. And that is exactly what I did. I put on one of my favorite albums. I wish I could remember which one it was, but that detail has faded over the years. Something upbeat and energetic. Something you could dance to. I turned the volume way up. Way louder than my parents would ever allow. The music pounded through the house, filling every room with sound. And then I just let loose. I danced around the living room like nobody was watching. Because nobody was. I sang along at the top of my lungs. I jumped on the furniture. I was completely free, and completely happy, and completely unaware that in just a few minutes, my entire understanding of reality was about to be shattered. The living room in our house was pretty big. It had large windows that let in lots of natural light. There was a comfortable couch and some chairs, a coffee table, bookshelves, and against one wall, my dad kept his gun cabinet. This was a beautiful piece of furniture, really. Dark wood with glass doors at the front, so you could see the rifles inside. My dad was a hunter, and he kept his guns locked up properly in this cabinet. The glass front was spotless because my mom made sure everything in the house stayed clean. You could see your reflection in it almost as clearly as in a mirror. I was dancing past the gun cabinet, spinning around with my arms out, completely lost in the music and the moment, when something in the glass caught my eye. A reflection. A shape that should not have been there. I stopped moving, just froze mid-spin. My arms dropped to my sides. The music kept playing, but I was not hearing it anymore. All my attention focused on that glass front, and what I could see reflected in it. There was someone standing behind me. A child. A little girl. I stared at the reflection, unable to move, unable to breathe. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, because I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was supposed to be alone in this house. My parents were gone. I had no siblings at home. There should not be anyone else here. And yet there was definitely someone standing right behind me. The reflection was crystal clear. I could see every detail. She looked about 8 years old. Small and delicate. She had blonde hair done up in ringlets, the kind of curls that take time and effort to create. Her hair was pulled back and tied with a blue satin ribbon. A bow. A beautiful old-fashioned blue bow that matched her dress. She wore a white pinafore dress. Pristine white, like something from another era. Over it, she had a blue gingham apron, blue and white checks in a pattern I recognized from old photographs. This was not modern clothing. This was the kind of dress a little girl might have worn 100 years ago. I could see all of this in the reflection. Every detail was sharp and clear. The curls in her hair, the folds in her dress, the pattern of the gingham. She stood perfectly still, just watching me. Her face was pale. Her expression was neutral, neither happy nor sad, just watching. My brain tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe I was seeing something else, and my mind was interpreting it as a person. Maybe I was hallucinating. But no matter how many rational explanations I tried to grab onto, I could not deny what my eyes were showing me. There was a little girl standing behind me, reflected perfectly in the glass of the gun cabinet. Slowly, moving like I was underwater, I turned around. I felt all the blood drain from my face. My skin went cold. My hands started shaking. Because she was there. She was actually there, standing in my living room. Not just a reflection. Not a trick of the light. A real, solid, three-dimensional little girl in an old-fashioned dress with blonde ringlets and a blue bow. My mouth fell open. I tried to say something, but no sound came out. I just stood there staring at her. And she stood there staring back at me. The music continued to blast from the stereo, but it felt distant now, like it was coming from another world. All I could focus on was this impossible child standing in my house. She did not move, did not speak, just stood there watching me with those pale, calm eyes. I do not know how long we looked at each other. It might have been 5 seconds. It might have been a full minute. Time felt strange and stretched out. I knew what I was seeing. On some deep instinctive level, I understood that this was not a normal child. This was not someone who had wandered into my house through an unlocked door. This was something else entirely. This was a ghost, an apparition, a spirit. Whatever word you want to use, I knew that I was looking at something that should not exist according to everything I had been taught about how the world works. My rational mind rebelled against this knowledge. It could not be. Ghosts were not real. They were just stories. Superstition. Things that scared children made up. But my eyes were showing me something different. My eyes were showing me a dead girl standing in my living room. I forced myself to turn away, to look back at the gun cabinet. I needed to confirm that I had really seen what I thought I had seen in the reflection. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe when I turned around there had been nothing there and my frightened mind had filled in the blanks. But no, the reflection was still there. I could still see her behind me in the glass. The same little girl in the same white dress with the same blue bow, standing in the same spot, watching me with the same calm expression. I turned around again, faster this time, spinning to face her. She was gone. The spot where she had been standing was empty, just ordinary living room. Carpet and furniture, and walls and windows. No little girl, no ghost, no impossible apparition. Nothing. I stood there breathing hard, staring at the empty space. My whole body was shaking now. I walked over to where she had been standing and looked around. Checked behind the furniture. Walked through the entire living room. Nothing. No sign that anyone had been there. But I knew what I had seen. The image was burned into my mind with perfect clarity. The ringlets, the bow, the white pinafore, the blue gingham apron, the pale face, those watching eyes. I had seen her as clearly as I have ever seen anything in my life. I did not know what to do. Part of me wanted to run out of the house immediately, to get in my car and drive away and not come back until my parents were home. But another part of me was rooted to the spot, too shocked to move. I walked over to the stereo on shaking legs and turned the music off. The sudden silence felt heavy and oppressive. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, normal sounds from a normal house. But nothing felt normal anymore. I went to the kitchen and sat down at the table, trying to process what had just happened. Trying to make sense of the impossible. A ghost. I had seen an actual ghost. In my house. In broad daylight. This was not some shadowy figure glimpsed in a dark hallway at midnight. This was a full, solid, detailed apparition that I had seen clearly in the middle of a sunny afternoon. My hands would not stop shaking. I clasped them together on the table and tried to steady my breathing. Think, I told myself. Think rationally about this. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe it had been a hallucination. Maybe I had been dehydrated or my blood sugar was low or something. But I knew that was not true. I felt fine physically. I was not sick or tired or impaired in any way. What I had seen was real. As real as the table I was sitting at, or the walls around me. I had seen a ghost. About 30 minutes passed. I just sat there at the kitchen table, replaying the moment over and over in my mind. Trying to convince myself it had not happened. Trying to accept that it had happened. Going back and forth between disbelief and terror. Then I heard a car in the driveway. I looked out the window and saw my boyfriend's car pulling up. Relief flooded through me. Another person. Someone else. Someone I could talk to. Someone who could help me feel less alone and frightened. I went to the front door and opened it before he could even knock. He was walking up the porch steps with a smile on his face, about to greet me, when he stopped. His smile faded. He looked at me with concern. "You okay?" he asked. "You look really pale." I opened my mouth to tell him what had happened, but before I could say anything, he continued talking. "Hey, who was that little girl on the porch?" he asked casually. Everything stopped. My heart, my breathing. Time itself seemed to freeze. I stared at him, unable to speak. "What?" I finally managed to whisper. "The little girl," he said again. "When I pulled up, there was a little girl standing on your porch. I thought maybe she was a neighbor kid or something, but she just stared at me for a second, and then she was gone." "Did she go back inside?" My legs felt weak. I grabbed the doorframe to steady myself. "Describe her," I said. My voice did not sound like my own. It was hollow and distant. He looked at me strangely, probably wondering why I was acting so weird. Okay. She had blonde hair, curly, done up with a bow or something. Blue, I think. And she was wearing this old-fashioned looking dress. White, with like a blue checked apron thing over it. Kind of weird clothes for a kid today, you know? Like something from an old photograph. I felt the world tilt. My vision went dark around the edges. I think I might have actually passed out for a second because the next thing I knew, my boyfriend had his hands on my shoulders, looking worried, asking me what was wrong. I told him everything. About dancing in the living room. about seeing the reflection in the gun cabinet, about turning around and seeing her standing there, about how she had vanished. And now this. He had seen her too, on the porch. The exact same little girl, the exact same impossible apparition. We were both silent for a long moment, processing this. He had been skeptical at first when I started telling the story. I could see it on his face. But as I described the girl and he realized it matched exactly what he had just seen, his skepticism turned to shock, and then to fear. We both saw her, he said quietly. We both saw the exact same thing. This was the detail that made it impossible to dismiss. If only I had seen her. Maybe it could have been a hallucination or a trick of my mind. But we had both seen her, independently, in different locations. The same blonde ringlets, the same blue bow, the same white pinafore, the same blue gingham apron. How could we both hallucinate the exact same incredibly specific details? We could not. Which meant what we had seen was real. As impossible as that seemed, it was real. My boyfriend stayed with me until my parents got home. Neither of us went inside the house. We sat in his car in the driveway, doors locked, like the car could somehow protect us from supernatural forces. We barely talked. What was there to say? We had both seen a ghost, and there was no rational way to explain or understand it. When my parents finally came home, I did not tell them what had happened. How could I? They would think I was crazy or making things up. So I pretended everything was fine and went about my evening as normally as possible, even though inside I was still shaking with fear and confusion. That night I barely slept. Every sound in the house made me jump. Every shadow looked suspicious. I kept expecting to see the little girl again, standing at the foot of my bed or in the corner of my room. But she did not appear. The house was quiet and normal, as if nothing strange had ever happened there. Over the next few days and weeks, I started doing research. This was 1994, before the internet was widespread and easily accessible like it is now. I had to actually go to the library and look through old newspapers and historical records. I talked to longtime neighbors. I asked around about the history of our house. What I found was both fascinating and terrifying. Our house had been built in the early 1900s. It was old, over 90 years old by the time my family moved in. Most of the original structure was still intact, though it had been renovated and updated over the decades. The land it sat on had an even longer history. I found a newspaper article from 1902. A small piece tucked away in the back pages of the local paper. It reported a tragic house fire that had occurred on the property where my house now stood. A different house, of course. The original structure that had been there before ours was built. The fire had started in the middle of the night. A family of 4 had lived in the house. The parents and 2 boys managed to escape. But one child did not make it out. A little girl, 8 years old, had died in the fire. The article did not give many details about her, just her name and age. But when I found a photograph of the family in the Historical Society archives, my blood ran cold. There she was, the little girl from the fire. And she was wearing a white pinafore dress with a blue gingham apron. Her blonde hair was done up in ringlets with a ribbon. It was her, the girl I had seen in my living room. The girl my boyfriend had seen on the porch. She had died in a fire over 90 years ago on the exact spot where my house now stood, and somehow her spirit remained. I kept this information to myself for years. I did not talk about it. I tried not to think about it. Life went on. I graduated high school, went to college, started my adult life. My family eventually moved to a different house. I moved away for school and then work. The years piled up, but I never forgot. The memory of that afternoon remained vivid and clear. the reflection in the gun cabinet, the way she looked standing in the living room, the details of her dress and hair, the calm expression on her pale face. Every detail stayed sharp in my mind. Years later, long after we had moved out of that house, I was visiting my older sister. We were having coffee and catching up, talking about childhood memories and the places we had lived. I do not know what prompted me to bring it up. Maybe I just needed to tell someone. Maybe I needed confirmation that I was not crazy. Did you ever see anything weird in that old house we lived in? I asked casually, trying to keep my tone light. Like anything you could not explain? My sister looked at me with a strange expression. She was quiet for a moment, like she was deciding whether to tell me something. Then she said, "You mean the little girl?" My heart started pounding. "What little girl?" "The ghost," she said simply. "The little blonde girl in the old-timey dress. I saw her a few times when we lived there. Never told anyone because I thought people would think I was crazy." I stared at my sister in shock. She had seen her too, multiple times apparently. The same little girl that I had seen. The same ghost that had appeared to me and my boyfriend on that spring afternoon. We compared notes. My sister described the same details. Blonde ringlets. Blue bow. White dress. Blue gingham apron. She had seen the girl in different parts of the house at different times. Sometimes she would just appear for a moment and then vanish. Sometimes my sister would see her out of the corner of her eye, standing in doorways or walking down the hallway. My sister had never felt threatened by the ghost. The girl never did anything scary or malicious. She just appeared sometimes, standing quietly, watching, like she was checking on the people now lived in the house where she had died. Learning that my sister had also seen the ghost changed something for me. It validated my experience in a way that nothing else could have. This was not just my imagination or a one-time hallucination. Multiple people, across multiple years, had all seen the same spirit in that house. We could not all be crazy. We could not all be making it up. I wondered how many other people had seen her over the years. How many families had lived in that house since 1902? How many of them had caught glimpses of a little blonde girl in old-fashioned clothes? How many had dismissed it as their imagination or been too afraid to talk about it? The girl had died so young. Just 8 years old. Her whole life ahead of her, cut short by tragedy. And somehow, some part of her had remained. Not at rest. Not moved on to whatever comes after death. Just lingering in the place where she had died, appearing to the living every now and then. I found myself feeling sad for her rather than afraid. This was a child who had suffered a terrible death. A child who for some reason could not or would not leave the place where she had lived and died. What kind of existence was that? To be trapped between worlds, appearing briefly to strangers who would be frightened of you, never able to truly interact or communicate or move forward? I researched more about the fire after talking to my sister. I wanted to know more about who this little girl had been in life. But there was not much information available. Just the basic facts from the newspaper article and a few census records that listed her as part of her family. Her name was Elizabeth. That is all I know. Elizabeth, 8 years old, who died in a house fire in 1902, and somehow became the ghost that haunted my childhood home nearly a century later. I think about her sometimes, even now, decades after I saw her. I wonder if she is still there, still appearing in that house to whoever lives there now, or if she has finally moved on to whatever comes next. I hope she has found peace. I hope she is not still trapped in that spot, endlessly repeating the same patterns, appearing to frighten people who do not understand what they are seeing. My experience with Elizabeth changed how I view the world. Before that afternoon in 1994, I was certain that ghosts did not exist, that the supernatural was just superstition and imagination, that everything could be explained by science and reason. But after seeing her, after having that experience validated by my boyfriend, and later by my sister, I could no longer hold on to that certainty. I had to accept that there are things in this world that we do not understand, phenomena that do not fit neatly into our scientific models, experiences that defy rational explanation. I am not saying I understand how ghosts work or why they exist. I do not have some grand theory about the supernatural. I just know what I saw. I know what my boyfriend saw. I know what my sister saw. And I know that sometimes, in certain places, under certain circumstances, the barrier between the living and the dead becomes thin enough for us to see through to the other side. That house is still standing, as far as I know. Other families have lived there since we moved out. I wonder if they have seen Elizabeth. I wonder if she still walks those rooms, appearing in reflections and standing on the porch, forever 8 years old in her white dress and blue bow. Sometimes I drive past the old neighborhood when I am visiting family in the area. I always slow down when I pass that house. Part of me wants to see her again, standing in one of the windows perhaps. Part of me dreads the possibility. I have not seen her since that day in 1994, but the memory is so vivid that sometimes it feels like I just saw her yesterday. I remember the exact way the sunlight came through the windows that afternoon. I remember what song was playing when I first saw her reflection, even though I said earlier that I forgot. It was something upbeat and energetic, the exact opposite of how I felt in that moment when I realized I was not alone. I remember the pattern of the gingham on her apron, blue and white squares, perfectly neat. I remember how the curls in her hair caught the light. I remember the blue satin of her bow. I remember her face, so pale and calm, watching me with eyes that had seen death. These details will never fade. They are burned into my memory with perfect clarity. I will carry them with me for the rest of my life. The afternoon I saw a ghost and had my entire worldview shattered in an instant. People ask me sometimes if I believe in ghosts. I always say yes, without hesitation. Because I do not just believe, I know. I have seen. And once you have had an experience like that, once you have looked into the face of the impossible and had it look back at you, you can never unknow it. The world is stranger than we think. Reality is more complex than we typically acknowledge. There are things that exist in the spaces between life and death. Things that linger when they should have moved on. Things that appear to us in moments when the veil between worlds grows thin. Elizabeth was one of those things. A little girl who died too young and could not let go. A spirit trapped in the place of her death, appearing to the living in her old-fashioned clothes, forever frozen in that last moment before the fire took her life. I saw her. My boyfriend saw her. My sister saw her. We all saw the same impossible thing. And that makes it real, no matter how much the rational part of my mind wants to deny it. This is my story. This is what happened to me when I was 17 years old, dancing in my living room on a sunny Saturday afternoon. This is the truth about the ghost of Elizabeth, the little girl in the blue ribbon who died in 1902 and never truly left. I hope she has found peace now. I hope that wherever she is no longer trapped or afraid. I hope that the fire that took her life did not also trap her spirit forever in that one terrible place. But I do not know. None of us can know for certain what happens after death, or why some spirits linger while others move on. All I know is what I saw. And what I saw was a ghost, the girl in the blue ribbon. Elizabeth, forever 8 years old, forever watching from the other side of the veil between life and death. Forever a reminder that the world contains more mysteries than we can possibly understand, Next one story start now. The hidden haunts of America. There is something about ghost stories that pulls at us. Something that makes us want to believe, want to explore, want to peek behind the curtain of our ordinary world and see what might be lurking there. I have spent years chasing these stories, visiting haunted places, talking to people who have seen things they cannot explain. And what I have learned is this: every town, every city, every forgotten corner of America has its own dark secrets, its own ghosts, its own unexplained mysteries waiting to be discovered. Let me take you on a journey through some of these places. Not the famous ones that everyone knows about. Not the tourist traps that sell tickets and t-shirts. But the real places where real people have experienced real encounters with something beyond our understanding. Places where the veil between worlds grows thin and strange things happen that science cannot explain. This is not just a collection of stories. This is a map. A guide to the haunted heart of America. And it starts in a city that most people think of as modern and hip and progressive. A city of live music and food trucks and tech startups. But underneath all that contemporary coolness lies a much darker history. A history that refuses to stay buried. Austin, Texas. I first visited Austin about 10 years ago. I went for the music, stayed for the food, and left with an entirely different appreciation for what that city really is. Because Austin is absolutely full of ghosts. So many ghosts that they actually run regular haunted tours through the downtown area. You can book them online. They happen almost every night. And the guides will take you to spot after spot, where people have died, where spirits linger, where unexplained phenomena occur with startling regularity. The first time I took one of these tours, I thought it would be cheesy. You know the kind. Actors dressed up in period costumes, telling exaggerated stories to tourists who want a mild thrill before going back to their hotels. But it was not like that at all. Our guide was serious, professional. She did not try to manufacture scares or embellish the stories. She just laid out the facts. And the facts were disturbing enough on their own. We started at the Driscoll Hotel. This gorgeous old building in the heart of downtown Austin that opened its doors in 1886. It is beautiful, elegant, the kind of place you would want to stay if you were visiting the city and had money to spend. But it is also incredibly haunted. Our guide told us about the little girl who died there. She was the daughter of a senator, staying at the hotel with her family sometime in the late 1800s. The story goes that she was playing on the grand staircase, bouncing a ball up and down the steps. She lost her balance, fell, broke her neck, died instantly on those beautiful marble stairs. And she never left. Guests at the Driscoll report seeing a little girl in old-fashioned clothes playing with a ball in the hallways. They hear bouncing sounds on the stairs late at night when no one is there. Some people have photographed strange orbs of light near the staircase that show up in pictures, but were not visible to the naked eye. The staff will tell you, if you ask them privately, that they have all experienced something strange in that hotel at one time or another. But the little girl is not the only spirit haunting the Driscoll. There is also a woman who killed herself in one of the upstairs rooms after being left at the altar. Guests in that room report overwhelming feelings of sadness and despair. Some have woken up in the middle of the night to find a woman in a wedding dress standing at the foot of their bed, crying. When they turn on the lights, she vanishes. Our guide took us through the hotel lobby, pointing out the spots where the most activity has been reported. She spoke in a calm, matter-of-fact tone, like she was describing historical architecture, rather than supernatural phenomena. But I could see the truth in her eyes. She believed these stories. She had probably experienced some of this herself. We moved on to other locations around downtown Austin. The Warehouse District. where an entire building full of workers died in a fire in the early 1900s. People walking past that building at night report hearing screams coming from inside, even though it has been empty for decades. Some have seen faces pressed against the windows from the inside, watching them pass. There was a bridge where a woman jumped to her death after her husband left her. Now people crossing that bridge late at night sometimes feel hands pushing them, as if someone is trying to make them jump too. Several near accidents have been reported there over the years. There was a restaurant built on the site of an old funeral home. The staff there refused to go into the basement alone. They have heard footsteps when no one else is down there. They have seen shadows moving in the corners. They have felt cold spots in certain rooms that have no rational explanation. One employee told our guide that she once saw a full-body apparition of a man in a suit standing in the basement, staring at her, before vanishing into thin air. Story after story, place after place, all within a few blocks of each other in downtown Austin. This was not some remote haunted mansion in the middle of nowhere. This was a vibrant modern city filled with people and activity. And underneath all that life, all that energy, there was this darker layer. A layer of death and tragedy and spirits that could not or would not move on. I have been on haunted tours in other cities since then. New Orleans, Savannah, Charleston, Boston. Each city has its own ghost stories, its own haunted locations. But Austin surprised me more than any of them, because it so completely contradicts the city's modern image. You do not expect a place known for music festivals and breakfast tacos to be absolutely crawling with ghosts. But it is. And here is the thing that really struck me during my time in Austin, and on all these tours in different cities. The guides and the local people do not treat this stuff like entertainment. They treat it like history, like facts. They do not try to scare you for fun. They just tell you what has happened in these places and let you draw your own conclusions. After Austin, I started looking more deliberately for these stories whenever I traveled. I would search online before visiting a new city. Look for the haunted places, the locations with dark histories, the spots where people had reported seeing or experiencing things they could not explain. And I found them everywhere. Florida became a particular interest of mine. The entire state is full of ghost stories and legends and strange phenomena. Maybe it is the history. Florida has been inhabited for thousands of years. Spanish conquistadors came through centuries ago. There have been wars and diseases and natural disasters. Lots of death. Lots of tragedy. The kind of events that, according to those who study such things, can leave psychic imprints on a location. Let me tell you about the Everglades. This massive wetland that covers the southern tip of Florida. Most people know it as a nature preserve. A place to see alligators and birds and unique ecosystems. And it is all of those things. But it is also home to one of America's most persistent cryptid legends. The skunk ape. Now, before you roll your eyes and dismiss this as just another Bigfoot knockoff, hear me out. The skunk ape sightings in Florida are numerous and consistent. They go back decades. Hundreds of people have reported seeing this creature. And these are not just random tourists looking for attention. These are park rangers, locals, people who spend their entire lives in the Everglades and know every animal that lives there. The descriptions are remarkably consistent. A large, ape-like creature, standing upright like a human, covered in dark matted hair, anywhere from 6 to 8 feet tall, and most distinctively, it gives off a terrible smell, like rotten eggs mixed with sewage, hence the name, skunk ape. I talked to a park ranger who worked in the Everglades for over 20 years. He was retired by the time I met him, comfortable enough in his retirement that he could speak freely without worrying about people thinking he was crazy. He told me that he had seen the skunk ape 3 times during his career. The first time was at dusk. He was doing a routine patrol along one of the remote trails when he saw something moving through the trees about 50 yards away. Something big. Too big to be a person. Wrong shape to be a bear. And there are not supposed to be bears in that part of the Everglades anyway. He stopped and watched it for about 30 seconds before it disappeared deeper into the swamp. He never got a clear look, but the size and the way it moved convinced him it was not any known animal. The second sighting was more dramatic. He was camping overnight in a remote section of the park, something rangers do periodically to monitor wildlife and check on the area. Around 2 in the morning, he woke up to the most horrible smell he had ever encountered. He described it as overwhelming. So bad it made his eyes water and his stomach turn. He unzipped his tent and looked outside, and standing about 20 feet away was this massive hairy figure. Just standing there, looking at his tent. He said they watched each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. Then the creature turned and walked away into the darkness. The ranger stayed awake the rest of the night, sitting in his tent with a flashlight and a flare gun, too terrified to sleep. The third sighting was the most fleeting. He was driving one of the park vehicles along a maintenance road when something large crossed the road about 100 feet ahead of him. It was there and gone in seconds. But he swears it was the same creature, the same size and shape and way of moving. When I asked him if he reported these sightings, he laughed. He said the first one he mentioned in passing to a colleague who looked at him like he was losing his mind. After that, he kept quiet, filed his reports like normal, did his job, but never forgot what he had seen. And he is not alone. If you dig into the reports, if you talk to people who live and work in the Everglades, you find that skunk ape sightings are common. Not everyone talks about them publicly because they do not want to be ridiculed. But privately, among themselves, people who spend time in those swamps will tell you that there is something out there. Something that is not supposed to exist according to our current understanding of biology, but exists nonetheless. Is it an undiscovered primate species? A remnant population of something we thought was extinct? A misidentification of known animals? I do not know. No one does. That is what makes it a mystery. But the sheer number of consistent reports from credible witnesses suggests that something is going on in the Everglades. Something worth paying attention to. From the wild swamps of the Everglades, let me take you to somewhere much more civilized. The city of Coral Gables, Florida. This is a wealthy, beautiful community just south of Miami. Mediterranean-style architecture. Tree-lined streets, expensive homes. And right in the middle of all this elegance stands the Biltmore Hotel. If you have never seen the Biltmore, it is breathtaking. Built in 1926, it looks like something out of a European fairy tale. This massive, gorgeous building with a tower that dominates the skyline. It was designed to be the height of luxury, the playground of the rich and famous. And for a few years in the late 1920s, that is exactly what it was. But then the Great Depression hit. The hotel struggled, changed hands multiple times. During World War II, it was converted into a military hospital. Wounded soldiers were treated there. Many of them died there. After the war, it served as a VA hospital for several more years before finally closing in 1968. The building sat empty and abandoned for decades, slowly deteriorating, vandalized, forgotten. Local teenagers would break in and explore the empty hallways, daring each other to venture deeper into the dark, decaying structure. And that is when the stories started. People exploring the abandoned Biltmore reported seeing things they could not explain. shadowy figures moving through the hallways, doors slamming shut by themselves, strange sounds echoing through empty rooms. Some people claimed to see ghostly soldiers wandering the corridors, still wearing their World War II uniforms, confused about where they were. The most famous ghost story from the Biltmore involves the tower. During the hotel's glamorous heyday in the 1920s, there was a famous mobster named Thomas Fatty Walsh, who was a regular guest. One night in 1929, Walsh was shot and killed on the 13th floor of the hotel tower. Murdered, most likely by rival gangsters, though the case was never officially solved. Since then, people have reported seeing Walsh's ghost in the tower, particularly on the 13th floor. A large man in 1920s style clothing. Sometimes he appears solid and real. Other times he is translucent, clearly not of this world. He does not interact with people or do anything threatening. He just appears, watches for a moment, and then fades away. The hotel was eventually renovated and reopened in 1987. It is gorgeous again now, a luxury resort where rooms cost hundreds of dollars per night. But the ghost did not leave when the renovation crews showed up. If anything, all that construction and activity seemed to stir up more paranormal phenomena. Hotel staff will tell you, if they trust you enough to be honest, that strange things happen there regularly. Guests report seeing people in their rooms who disappear when looked at directly. The elevators sometimes go to floors that no one pressed the button for. Sometimes they open on empty floors where shadowy figures stand waiting, then close again before anyone can get on. Housekeepers refuse to clean certain rooms alone because of the overwhelming feeling of being watched. The pool area is particularly active. The Biltmore has this enormous, beautiful pool, the largest hotel pool in the continental United States when it was built. During the hotel's golden age, famous people like Judy Garland and Bing Crosby swam there. Synchronized swimming shows were performed for guests. It was glamorous and exciting. But several people drowned in that pool over the years, accidents mostly. A few suicides. And now guests swimming at dusk or after dark sometimes report feeling hands grabbing at their ankles underwater, pulling them down. When they surface in panic and look around, no one is there. They are alone in the pool. But they definitely felt something touch them. I stayed at the Biltmore once specifically because of these stories. I wanted to experience it for myself, see if I could sense anything unusual. My room was on the 8th floor. Not the infamous 13th floor where Walsh was killed, but still high up in the tower. Nothing particularly dramatic happened during my stay. I did not see any ghosts or experience anything overtly supernatural. But there was a feeling to that hotel. An atmosphere. Like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I would wake up in the middle of the night for no reason, feeling absolutely certain that someone else was in the room with me. But when I turned on the lights, I was always alone. The second night I was there, I took a walk around the hotel grounds after midnight. The place was beautiful in the moonlight, quiet and peaceful. I walked past the pool, which was closed and covered for the night. As I stood there looking at it, I heard splashing. Clear, distinct splashing sounds, like someone was swimming. I walked closer and looked at the pool. The cover was secure. Nothing was disturbed, but I had definitely heard splashing. I stood there for a few more minutes, listening. It happened again. Splash, splash, splash. The sounds of someone doing laps. But the pool was empty and covered. I left quickly after that. Went back to my room and locked the door. I did not see or hear anything else that night, but I did not sleep well either. There was too much energy in that place. Too much history. Too many tragic stories compressed into one building. That is the thing about these haunted places. You do not always see ghosts or have dramatic supernatural experiences. Sometimes it is just a feeling, an atmosphere, a sense that you are not alone, that you are sharing space with something else. Something that exists just slightly outside our normal perception. The Biltmore taught me that lesson. It is not just about full-body apparitions and objects flying across the room. Sometimes a haunting is much more subtle. A cold spot here, an unexplained sound there, a feeling that makes your skin crawl even when nothing obvious is happening. After Florida, I started looking more systematically at haunted locations across America. And I discovered something fascinating. There really is not a town in any state that does not have at least one location with a reputation for being haunted. Some places have more than others, of course. Cities with long histories and tragic pasts tend to accumulate more ghost stories. But even small towns in the middle of nowhere have their haunted house or their ghost road or their cemetery where strange things happen. I found ghost towns in every single state. Not just literal ghost towns, though those exist too. Abandoned mining communities or failed settlements slowly being reclaimed by nature. But also towns that still have living residents alongside their ghostly ones. Places where the past and present overlap in strange and unsettling ways. In New Mexico, I visited a town called Madrid. It is a former coal mining community that was completely abandoned in the 1950s when the mines closed. The entire town sat empty for decades until artists and hippies started moving in during the 1970s and 1980s. Now it is this quirky little art community. Galleries and shops selling handmade crafts. But the ghosts of the miners never left. People living in Madrid report hearing mining sounds late at night. The clang of metal on stone. The rumble of ore cars moving on tracks that no longer exist. Sometimes they see figures in old mining clothes walking down the street, heading toward the mine, before fading away. In Pennsylvania, I visited Centralia. This is a real ghost town, though a few stubborn residents refuse to leave. The town has been burning since 1962. An underground coal fire that started accidentally and has been spreading through the abandoned mine tunnels ever since. The fire made most of the town uninhabitable. Poisonous gases seeping up through the ground. Streets cracked open by the heat below. The few people who still live there do so in defiance of evacuation orders. I drove through Centralia on a cold autumn morning. Smoke rose from cracks in the ground. The pavement was buckled and broken. Most of the buildings were long gone, demolished for safety. A few structures still stood, abandoned and slowly collapsing. It felt apocalyptic, like the end of the world. And the people who lived there before the fire, the ones who had to leave their homes and never come back, they left ghosts behind. People who visit Centralia report seeing figures in the windows of buildings that no longer exist. Hearing voices calling out from the smoke. Finding fresh footprints in the ash that lead nowhere. I am not sure if these are actual ghosts, or if places like Centralia create such powerful emotional resonance that they imprint themselves on visitors' minds. Maybe tragedy leaves a mark on a location that sensitive people can pick up on. Maybe when enough pain and loss occurs in one place, it creates a kind of recording that replays under certain conditions. Or maybe ghosts are real, and the dead really do linger in places that meant something to them in life. I have investigated enough locations, heard enough stories, talked to enough credible witnesses that I lean toward the latter explanation. I think ghosts are real. I think consciousness can survive death in some form. I think certain people and certain places create conditions where the barrier between the living and the dead becomes permeable. But I do not claim to understand how it works. No one does. We can collect evidence. We can document experiences. We can establish patterns. But the actual mechanism behind hauntings remains mysterious. What I do know is that every town has its stories. Every community has its haunted locations. And if you start looking, if you start asking questions and digging into local history, you will find them. I found a haunted lighthouse in Maine where the keeper fell to his death in 1869 and still walks the spiral stairs every night, checking to make sure the light is lit. I found a theater in Oregon where an actor died on stage during a performance and now appears in the wings during rehearsals, watching the new shows. I found a battlefield in Virginia where you can still hear cannon fire and screaming on the anniversary of the battle, even though it happened over 150 years ago. These places exist all over America, in cities and small towns, in tourist destinations and forgotten corners. Everywhere humans have lived and died, they have left traces, echoes, ghosts. Sometimes I wonder what makes certain places more haunted than others. Why do some locations have intense paranormal activity while others, with similar histories, remain quiet? What determines whether a spirit lingers or moves on? Violent death seems to be a common factor. People who die suddenly, unexpectedly, violently, often seem more likely to become ghosts. Like they do not realize they are dead. Like they are trapped in the moment of their death, replaying it over and over. Emotional attachment is another factor. People who loved a place deeply in life sometimes seem unable to leave it after death. The lighthouse keeper who fell to his death still checks his light because that was his purpose in life. The actor who died on stage still watches performances because that was his passion. Unfinished business is a classic explanation in ghost lore. People with something left undone, some goal unaccomplished, some wrong unrighted. They stick around trying to complete whatever they left unfinished, unable to rest until it is done. But sometimes there does not seem to be any clear reason. Sometimes people just see ghosts. Ordinary people who lived ordinary lives and died ordinary deaths, but whose spirits remain visible to the living for no apparent reason. I think about the little girl at the Driskill Hotel. She died in an accident. She was young, but not particularly young. 8 years old enough to have some understanding of death. Her death was not violent or prolonged. It was quick. A fall, broken neck. Over in seconds. So why did she stay? Why does she still play with her ball on that staircase? What keeps her tied to that location when so many others in similar circumstances have moved on? I do not have answers to these questions. I just have the stories, the experiences, the evidence that something is happening in these places that we cannot fully explain. What I can tell you is this: if you are interested in the supernatural, if you want to experience something beyond the ordinary, you do not have to travel far. You do not need to visit famous haunted houses or take expensive ghost tours. Just look into the history of your own town, your own neighborhood, the building you work in, the street you live on. Chances are, something happened there, someone died, some tragedy occurred. And if you pay attention, if you look and listen carefully, you might find evidence that those events left traces. Ghosts, spirits, echoes of the past that persist into the present. I am not telling you to go looking for trouble or to put yourself in dangerous situations. Hunting ghosts is not like it looks in movies and television shows. It is mostly just sitting quietly in dark places, paying attention, waiting for something to happen. And usually nothing does. But every once in a while you experience something. You see something. You hear something. You feel something. And in that moment, everything you thought you knew about reality shifts. That is what draws people to haunted places. Not just the thrill of being scared, though that is part of it, but the possibility of glimpsing something beyond our normal experience. Of touching, however briefly, a mystery that science has not yet solved. Austin, Texas. The Everglades. The Biltmore Hotel. These are just a few examples. Just a few dots on a much larger map. A map that covers every state, every town, every community in America. The ghosts are there. The stories are there. The haunted places are there. You just have to be willing to look for them. To ask questions. To investigate. To spend time in places where the veil between worlds grows thin. And if you do, if you really commit to exploring the supernatural in your area, I promise you will find something. Maybe not a full-body apparition. Maybe not a dramatic poltergeist event, but something. Some small piece of evidence that there is more to this world than meets the eye. Because everywhere humans have been, everywhere we have lived and loved and died, we leave marks, impressions, ghosts. And those ghosts are still there, still present, still sharing space with us. We just have to pay attention to notice them. So yes, I absolutely recommend looking up haunted tours in whatever city you visit. Not just Austin, though Austin's tours are excellent, but any city with history, any town with stories. Take the tours, listen to the guides, visit the locations, and see for yourself. Who does not like a good ghost story, right? We all do. But more than that, we like the possibility that those stories might be true. That the dead might not be entirely gone. That consciousness might persist beyond death. That there are mysteries in this world that remain unsolved. That is what draws us to haunted places. That is what makes us search online for ghost tours and paranormal locations. That is what makes us slow down when we pass an old abandoned building and wonder what might be inside. The ghosts are waiting. In every town, in every state, in every corner of America. They are there, existing just slightly outside our normal perception, occasionally making themselves known to those who pay attention. All you have to do is look. Next one story start now. The Woman with No Eyes. Some ghost stories come from books or movies or campfire tales passed down through generations. But the most terrifying ones, the ones that burrow deep into your mind and never leave, are the ones that come from people you trust. People who have no reason to lie. People who looked into the face of something impossible and lived to tell about it. This is one of those stories. This is something that happened to my grandmother. Something she told my mother. Something my mother told me when I was a child. And it has haunted me ever since. Not because it is particularly gory or violent, but because of what it suggests about death and what might come after. About the possibility that some people, some souls, are so twisted and bitter that even death cannot cleanse them. That they carry their darkness with them into whatever comes next. Let me start at the beginning. Let me tell you about Trescobel Trinsky. What a name, right? Trescobel. Even the name sounds like something from a dark fairy tale. Like the name of a witch or a villain in some old story, meant to frighten children into behaving. And according to everyone who knew her, that is exactly what she was. A villain. A witch in all but name. A woman so mean and so hateful that the entire town feared her. My grandmother grew up in a small town. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business. Where families live in the same houses for generations. Where the past never really goes away because it is embedded in every street corner, and every old building and every person who has lived there their whole lives. Trescobel Trinsky lived on the edge of town in a house that looked exactly like you would expect a witch's house to look. Old. Run down. Paint peeling off the wooden siding. Shutters hanging crooked. A yard full of weeds and dead plants. The kind of house that children cross the street to avoid walking past. And Trescobel herself was just as unwelcoming as her house. She was old, though no one seemed to know exactly how old. Some said she was in her 70s. Others claimed she was well into her 80s or even 90s. She had that ageless quality that some very old people have, where they look ancient but you cannot pin down their actual age. She was small and hunched. Her hair was thin and gray, always pulled back in a severe bun. Her face was a maze of wrinkles, deep lines carved by years of frowning and scowling. She dressed in black, always black. Long dark dresses that hung on her thin frame like funeral shrouds. She looked exactly like what she was. A mean old woman who hated the world and everyone in it. But she especially hated children. My grandmother told my mother that Trescabelle had never married, never had children of her own. Some said she had been engaged once, many years ago, but her fiancé had died in the war. Others said no man would have her because she was too mean and too difficult. Whatever the reason, she lived alone in that creaky old house with only her cat for company. Shadow. That was the cat's name. A gray tabby with darker stripes. Green eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light of Trescabelle's windows. The cat was the only living thing that Trescabelle seemed to care about. The only creature she showed any affection toward. She loved that cat more than anything in the world. The children in town were terrified of Trescabelle. Rumors swirled around her like dark clouds. Whispered stories passed from one kid to another during recess or at sleepovers. Stories that grew more elaborate and frightening with each retelling. Some kids said she was a witch. A real witch with real powers. They said she could curse you if you got too close to her house. Make you sick. Make bad things happen to your family. They said she had books of spells hidden in her basement. Jars of strange ingredients. Bones and herbs and who knows what else. Other kids said she ate children. That she would lure kids into her house with promises of candy or cookies, and they would never be seen again. Their parents would search but would never find them because Trescabelle had cooked them up and eaten them and buried their bones in her weed-choked backyard. Were these stories true? Of course not. They were just the kind of wild tales that scared kids tell each other. The kind of stories that turn every strange old person into a monster. But the stories persisted because Trescabelle did nothing to contradict them. If anything, she seemed to encourage the fear. She would stand at her window and watch the street, waiting. Anytime children walked past her house, she would be there. That pale face pressed against the dirty glass. Those dark eyes staring. And if the kids got too close, if they lingered on the sidewalk in front of her property, she would throw open the window and yell at them. My grandmother remembered walking past that house as a child. She would always cross to the other side of the street, would walk as quickly as she could without running, would keep her eyes forward and try not to look at those windows. But she could feel Trescabelle watching, could sense those hateful eyes tracking her movement. One time my grandmother's ball had rolled into Trescabelle's yard. Just a simple rubber ball, the kind every kid had. It bounced off the sidewalk and rolled through the broken fence into that jungle of dead weeds. My grandmother stood on the sidewalk, staring at her ball, trying to decide what to do. She could leave it, just abandon it and go home and ask her parents for a new ball. That was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But it was her favorite ball, red with white stars. She had saved her allowance to buy it. She did not want to lose it. So she took a deep breath and stepped through the broken fence into Trescabelle's yard. The ball was only about 10 feet from the fence. She could see it sitting in the tall grass. She walked toward it quickly, wanting to grab it and get out as fast as possible. Her hand was reaching for the ball when she heard the voice. "Get off my property." My grandmother froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She looked up at the house and there was Trescabelle, standing on the porch, that tiny hunched figure in a black dress. Shadow the cat sitting at her feet. I said, "Get off my property, you little brat. This is not a playground." My grandmother grabbed her ball and ran. She scrambled back through the fence and ran all the way home without stopping. She was crying by the time she got there. Not because Trescabel had hurt her or even really threatened her, but because of the hatred in that voice. The pure venom. My grandmother was just a little girl who wanted her ball back, and Trescabel had looked at her like she was something disgusting. Something that needed to be crushed and destroyed. That was the kind of person Trescabel Trinsky was. Mean to her core. Bitter and hateful and cruel. She seemed to take pleasure in frightening children, in making them uncomfortable, in being the monster that they whispered about in their scary stories. As my grandmother got older and moved away from that street, she did not think about Trescabel much anymore. The old woman became just another childhood memory. Another piece of the past that fades as new experiences pile on top of it. Years went by. My grandmother grew up, got married, had children of her own, including my mother. She built a life far away from that small town and that creaky old house, and that mean old woman who hated children. But she kept in touch with some people from the old neighborhood. Christmas cards. Occasional phone calls. The kind of loose connections that people maintain with their past, even as they move forward into their future. That is how she heard that Trescabel Trinsky had died. It happened in the middle of winter. Trescabel had gotten sick. Some kind of flu or pneumonia. At her age and in her condition, it hit hard and fast. She refused to go to the hospital, refused to let anyone help her. She stayed in that house alone with her cat, getting sicker and weaker, until finally her body gave out. Her son found her. My grandmother had not even known Trescabel had a son. Apparently he lived several states away, and barely spoke to his mother. The relationship was strained, to put it mildly. But he was her only living relative, so when she died, the responsibility of dealing with her estate fell to him. He came to town for the funeral. There were only a handful of people there. No one who actually cared about Trescabel. Just a few neighbors who came out of obligation. A curiosity. A sense that someone should be there even if no one would miss her. The son was middle-aged, tired-looking. He clearly wanted to get this over with as quickly as possible. Sell the house. Sell or donate whatever was inside. Settle the estate and get back to his own life. Put his mother and all the bad memories associated with her behind him for good. That is where my grandmother came in. She heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Trescabel's son needed help clearing out the house. He was doing it alone, and it was slow going. The house was full of decades of accumulated stuff. Furniture and clothes, and books and random objects that Trescabel had collected over her long life. It would take weeks for one person to sort through it all. My grandmother volunteered to help. Not because she had any fondness for Trescabel, but because she felt sorry for the son. And because there was a part of her, a curious part, that wanted to see inside that house. The house she had feared as a child. The house that had loomed so large in her childhood nightmares. She wanted to see what it was really like inside. To demystify it. To prove to herself that it was just a normal house and Trescabel had been just a mean old woman. Not the monster that childhood imagination had made her into. So one Saturday morning my grandmother drove to that old neighborhood. Parked in front of that rundown house. Walked up those creaky porch steps. And knocked on the door that she would have run from in terror as a child. Trescabel's son answered. He looked exhausted. Grateful for the help. He let my grandmother inside and showed her around. The house was exactly what you would expect. Dark. Cluttered. Dusty. It smelled like old lady perfume and cat and something else. Something stale and unpleasant that my grandmother could not quite identify. The furniture was ancient. The wallpaper was peeling. Every surface was covered with knickknacks and photographs and random objects. They decided to work through the house room by room. The son would make decisions about what to keep and what to throw away. My grandmother would help pack things into boxes or bags. They started in the living room, then moved to the kitchen, then the dining room. It was tedious work, but it went faster with two people. They chatted as they worked. The son told my grandmother a little about his life, about how he had left home as soon as he could, how he had not spoken to his mother in years before she died, how he felt guilty about that but also relieved that she was gone. He confirmed what everyone had suspected. Trescabel had been a terrible mother, cold, cruel, impossible to please. She had made his childhood miserable. He had tried to have a relationship with her as an adult, but she pushed him away, criticized everything he did, made it clear that he was a disappointment. Eventually, he gave up trying. They spoke maybe once a year, stilted conversations that left both of them unhappy. "I should feel sadder that she is gone," he told my grandmother. "But mostly I just feel tired." "Does that make me a bad person?" My grandmother assured him that it did not. That sometimes relationships are too broken to fix. That he had tried, and that was what mattered. She liked him. He seemed like a good man who had been dealt a bad hand when it came to mothers. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon. Box after box, bag after bag, sorting a lifetime of possessions. Most of it went into the trash pile. Trescabel had not owned much of value, just the usual accumulation of cheap furniture and old clothes and random household items. They saved the bedroom for last. Neither of them was eager to go in there. That was where Trescabel had died, where her son had found her body. The room had been cleaned and the bed had been stripped, but there was still something uncomfortable about being in there, about sorting through the intimate possessions of a dead woman, in the very room where she had taken her last breath. The bedroom was at the back of the house, small and dark. One window that looked out over the overgrown backyard. An old bed with a metal frame. A dresser. A nightstand. A closet full of black dresses. They worked in silence, both of them wanting to get through this final room as quickly as possible. The son took the closet. My grandmother started on the dresser, pulling out drawers full of old lady undergarments and stockings and handkerchiefs, sorting them into the trash bag. That is when she heard it. A sound from behind her, from the direction of the window. She paused, listened. Probably just the house settling. Old houses make noise, everyone knows that. But something about the sound made her uneasy. She turned to look at the son. He was focused on the closet, pulling out dresses and putting them in boxes. He had not heard anything, or if he had, he was ignoring it. My grandmother went back to her work, pulled out another drawer, started sorting through its contents. There it was again. That sound, louder this time, more distinct. A rustling, like fabric moving, like someone shifting their weight. My grandmother's heart started to beat faster. She told herself it was nothing. Just her imagination, just nerves from being in this house, in this room, where so much fear and hatred had lived for so many years. But she had to look, had to turn around and check the window just to prove to herself that nothing was there. She took a deep breath, straightened up, turned toward the window. And there, standing at the window looking out over the backyard, was Trescabel Trinsky. My grandmother's breath caught in her throat. Her entire body went cold. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. She just stood there, frozen, staring at the impossible figure by the window. It was definitely Trescabel. That small hunched frame. That thin gray hair pulled back in a bun. That black dress hanging loose on her skeletal form. She stood with her back to my grandmother, looking out the window the same way she had looked out the front window all those years ago. Watching. Always watching. My grandmother's mind raced through explanations. Maybe it was not really Trescabel. Maybe it was just someone who looked like her. Maybe the son had hired someone else to help and my grandmother just had not noticed them. Maybe it was a neighbor who had let themselves in. But even as these thoughts flickered through her mind, she knew they were not true. She knew, with absolute certainty, that she was looking at a ghost. At the spirit of Trescabel Trinsky, who had died in this very room just months ago. The figure began to turn. Slowly, so slowly, rotating to face my grandmother. That is when my grandmother saw what had been done to her. What death had done to Trescabel Trinsky. She had no eyes. Where her eyes should have been, there were just empty sockets. Dark voids in her pale face. Holes that seemed to go on forever. Looking into those empty eye sockets was like looking into the darkness, at the center of the universe. The absolute absence of light, and life and hope. But somehow, impossibly, my grandmother knew that Trescabel could still see her. Those empty sockets were looking right at her, staring at her with the same hateful intensity that Trescabel had always had in life, and she was not alone. In her arms, cradled like a baby, was Shadow, the gray tabby cat. The only thing Trescabel had ever loved. The cat was also missing its eyes. Empty sockets where green eyes had once glowed. Its mouth hung open in a silent hiss revealing small sharp teeth. My grandmother finally understood how Trescabel had died. She had gotten sick, weak, collapsed on her bed. And in her confusion and pain, she had rolled over on top of Shadow, crushed the poor animal beneath her body weight. They had died together, owner and pet, both suffocating in that dark bedroom, both dying alone, and apparently both remaining together in death. Trescabel's mouth began to open, wider and wider, far wider than any human mouth should be able to open. And inside that mouth was not a tongue or teeth or anything that should be inside a mouth. Inside was only darkness, a void. The same endless darkness that filled her eye sockets. It looked like her mouth was a doorway into nothing, into the absence of everything. Into whatever dark place Trescabel's soul had gone when it left her body. My grandmother stood paralyzed. She wanted to run, wanted to scream. Wanted to grab the son and get out of that house immediately. But her body would not obey. She could only stand there, rooted to the spot, staring into the eyeless face of Trescabel Trinsky and the dark void where her mouth should have been. The cat hissed again. This time my grandmother heard it. A horrible sound. Not like a normal cat hiss. It was deeper, more guttural. It sounded wrong. Like the noise a cat would make if it was being played backwards or distorted somehow. It was the sound of something dead trying to remember how to make the sounds of the living. Trescabel's mouth hung open, that dark void exposed. And my grandmother realized that Trescabel was trying to speak, trying to say something. But no sound came out. Just silence, just that horrible gaping mouth opening and closing. Opening and closing, like a fish drowning in air. My grandmother did not know what Trescabel was trying to say. She did not want to know. Whatever message the dead woman was trying to communicate, my grandmother wanted no part of it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few seconds, my grandmother's body unlocked. She could move again. She gasped, took a step backward. Bumped into the dresser behind her. The sound of her movement caught the son's attention. He looked up from the closet. "You okay?" he asked. "You look like you have seen a ghost." My grandmother looked at him, then back at the window. The figure was gone. Trescabel in shadow had vanished. The window was empty, just dirty glass looking out over a weedy backyard. Nothing more. My grandmother started, but what could she say? How could she explain what she had just seen? He would think she was crazy, or lying, or making up stories for attention. I have a headache, she said finally. A bad one. I think I need to go home and lie down. The son looked concerned but understanding. Of course. We have made good progress today anyway. Thank you so much for your help. My grandmother gathered her things, made her excuses, got out of that house as quickly as she could without running. She did not look back, did not glance at the bedroom window, did not let herself think about what she had seen until she was safely in her car, with the doors locked and the engine running. Then she allowed herself to shake, to process what had happened, to accept the impossible truth that she had just seen a ghost. That Trescabel Trinsky was still in that house, still watching from the windows, still filled with the same hatred that had consumed her in life. My grandmother drove home in a daze. She never went back to that house, never spoke to the son again. She heard later that he had finished clearing out the place and put it up for sale. It took a long time to sell. No one wanted to buy Trescabel Trinsky's house. Eventually someone bought it cheap and tore it down, built something new on the lot. My grandmother never told the son what she had seen. What would be the point? He was already dealing with enough. He did not need to know that his mother's spirit was still haunting the place where she died, that she was trapped there with her dead cat, both of them eyeless, trying to speak with mouths that opened onto darkness. But she did tell my mother. Years later, when my mother was old enough to understand, she described the whole experience in vivid detail. The way Trescabel had stood at the window, the empty eye sockets, the cat with no eyes, the mouth hanging open with nothing but void inside, the silent screaming, the horrible hiss of the dead cat. My mother asked her why Trescabel had no eyes. My grandmother said she did not know for sure, but she had a theory. In many cultures, eyes are considered windows to the soul. When Trescabel died, when her soul left her body, maybe something went wrong. Maybe because she was so full of hatred and bitterness, her soul could not move on properly, could not go to whatever afterlife was waiting. Maybe it got stuck, caught between worlds, between life and death. And maybe that in-between state, that liminal existence, required a sacrifice, required giving up something. The eyes, the windows to the soul. In order to exist as a ghost, as a spirit trapped between worlds, maybe Trescabel had to surrender her eyes, had to give up those connections to the living world. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe the eyes are the first thing to go when someone becomes a ghost. Maybe when you cross over into that realm of the dead, you no longer need physical eyes to see. So they rot away, leaving only empty sockets and whatever supernatural sight replaces human vision. My grandmother did not know. She only knew what she had seen, and what she continued to see. Because Trescabel did not stay confined to that house. My grandmother told my mother that she started appearing in her dreams. Not every night, not even regularly. But sometimes when my grandmother least expected it, she would fall asleep and find herself standing in that bedroom again. And there would be Trescabel, at the window, with Shadow in her arms, both of them with empty eye sockets staring at her. And Trescabel would turn, and that mouth would open. That void would be exposed, and she would try to scream, try to say something, but no sound would come out. Just silence. Just that horrible gaping mouth moving soundlessly. Screaming with no sound. Then my grandmother would wake up. Heart pounding. Covered in sweat. The image of those empty eyes burned into her mind. The dreams continued for years. Less frequent as time went on, but they never stopped completely. Every few months, sometimes every few weeks, Trescabel would appear. Always the same. Always at the window. Always with the cat. Always trying to speak. Always silent. My mother asked my grandmother what she thought Trescabel was trying to say. What message was so important that her ghost would keep appearing, keep trying to communicate, even though no sound could escape that dark void where her mouth should be. My grandmother said she did not want to know. Whatever Trescabel was trying to say, it could not be anything good. In life, the woman had never said anything kind or helpful or loving. Why would death change that? Whatever message she was trying to deliver from beyond the grave, my grandmother wanted no part of it. My mother told me this story when I was young. Too young, probably. It gave me nightmares. The image of Trescabel with no eyes, holding her eyeless cat, screaming silently from a mouth that was nothing but darkness. That image haunted me the way it had haunted my grandmother. I asked my mother if my grandmother still had the dreams, if Trescabel still appeared to her. My mother said yes, less often now. But sometimes, my grandmother would call my mother early in the morning, voice shaky, and say simply, "I saw her again last night." And my mother would know exactly who she meant. Would know that my grandmother had once again been visited by the ghost of Trescabel Trinsky and her dead cat Shadow. I am older now. An adult. I have my own children. And I understand things about this story that I could not understand when I was young. I understand that some people are so consumed by hatred and bitterness that it poisons everything about them. Not just their relationships with other people, but their very souls. Trescabel Trinsky was that kind of person. She hated the world, hated children, hated life itself. And that hatred did not disappear when she died. It followed her into death. It became the defining characteristic of her ghost. I understand that death does not automatically make people better. It does not cleanse away the ugliness of who we were in life. If we were cruel and mean and hateful when we were alive, we carry that cruelty with us when we die. Trescabel was a monster in life, and she remained a monster in death. I understand that my grandmother was traumatized by what she saw. That seeing Trescabel's ghost was not just a spooky experience to tell stories about. It was something that genuinely frightened her. Something that invaded her dreams for years afterward. Something that she could never fully escape. And I understand why this is the most terrifying ghost story I have ever heard. Not because of blood or violence or jump scares, but because of what it suggests about the nature of existence. That consciousness survives death. That our souls persist beyond our bodies. That who we are in life determines what we become in death. And if that is true, if our essential nature follows us beyond the grave, then what happened to Trescabel Trinsky could happen to anyone. Anyone who dies consumed by hatred or bitterness or rage might find themselves trapped between worlds. Might become a ghost. An eyeless specter trying to scream messages that no one can hear. Stuck forever in the moment of death, unable to move forward, unable to find peace. That is a fate more terrifying than anything in horror movies. To be trapped. To be unable to communicate. To be consumed by the same negative emotions that poisoned your life, but now for eternity, with no escape, no hope of change or growth or redemption. I think about Trescabel sometimes, wonder if she is still out there, still appearing in dreams, still standing at windows with her dead cat, still trying to scream messages from a mouth full of darkness. I think about what she might be trying to say. Is it a warning? A plea for help? A curse directed at the living? Or is it just meaningless noise, the static of a dead soul that cannot let go? I will never know. And like my grandmother, I do not want to know. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some messages are better left unheard. All I know is this: be careful how you live your life. Be careful what kind of person you become. Be careful what emotions you feed and nurture. Because if the story of Treskabel Trinsky teaches us anything, it is that who we are in life matters. It shapes not just our time on Earth, but whatever comes after. Do not be like Treskabel. Do not become so consumed by hatred and bitterness that it destroys your soul. Do not live your life in such a way that death becomes not a release but a prison. Do not become the kind of person who cannot rest even after dying, because your own darkness has trapped you. Be kind, be loving, be compassionate. Not just because it is the right thing to do, but because it might matter more than you think. It might determine what happens to your consciousness after your body dies. It might be the difference between moving on to whatever peaceful afterlife awaits us, and becoming an eyeless ghost, trapped forever, screaming silent screams that no one can hear. That is the lesson of Treskabel Trinsky. That is the true horror of her story. Not the empty eye sockets, or the dark void mouth, or even the dead cat with no eyes, but the possibility that our cruelty in life condemns us to an eternity of torment in death. My grandmother knows this. She saw it with her own eyes. She looked into the face of what happens when hatred outlives the body that contained it. And it changed her, made her more conscious of how she treated people, made her more determined to live with kindness and grace. Because she did not want to become like Treskabel, did not want to die and find herself trapped as a ghost, did not want to lose her eyes and her voice and her ability to connect with the world, did not want to spend eternity trying to scream messages that would never be heard. That is the most terrifying ghost story I have ever heard. Not because of what happened to my grandmother that day in Treskabel's bedroom, but because of what it suggests could happen to any of us if we are not careful. If we let darkness take root in our souls. If we die the way Treskabel died, alone and mean and full of hatred, with only a dead cat for company. So take care. Be mindful. Choose kindness over cruelty. Choose love over hatred. Choose light over darkness. Not just for the sake of your life, but for the sake of whatever comes after. Because you do not want to end up like Treskabel Trinsky, standing at a window with empty eye sockets, holding a dead cat with no eyes, trying to scream from a mouth that opens onto nothing but void. Trapped forever in the prison of your own darkness, unable to move on, unable to find peace, unable to do anything but haunt the dreams of the living. A cautionary tale about what happens when hatred outlives the body that contained it. That is the story. That is what happened to my grandmother. That is what she saw. And that is what still haunts her dreams all these years later. The eyeless woman and her eyeless cat. The silent screaming. The void where a mouth should be. The ghost of Treskabel Trinsky, paying the price for a lifetime of cruelty and hatred. Forever and ever and ever. Next one story start now. The last visit. There are moments in life that split your existence into before and after. Moments so profound, so devastating, that you measure everything else against them. Losing a parent as a child is one of those moments. But what I experienced was more than just loss. It was something that challenged everything I thought I knew about life and death, and the boundaries between them. This is the story of the night my mother came home, hours after she had already died. This is the story of her final goodbye. I need to start at the beginning to help you understand. To give you the full picture of what happened and why it matters. to explain how an 8-year-old boy came face to face with something impossible on the worst night of his young life. My mother was the center of our world. That is how it is when you are 8 years old. Your mother is everything. She is safety and comfort and love. She is the person who makes everything okay when things go wrong. She is the constant in a confusing world. She is home. My mother was a quiet woman. Not shy exactly, but reserved. She kept things to herself. She did not complain much even when things were difficult. She had this way of smiling and saying everything was fine even when you could tell it was not. My father used to joke that she could be in the middle of a hurricane and would still insist that it was just a little breeze, nothing to worry about. That tendency to minimize problems, to keep struggles private, to not burden others with her pain, that is what killed her in the end. March 2008. I remember the date precisely because it is burned into my memory. March 17th, 2008. That was the day everything changed. That was the day my mother was admitted to the hospital. I was 8 years old. My brother was 6. We were too young to really understand what was happening. We knew Mom was sick. We knew she had gone to the hospital. But kids that age do not fully grasp the concept of serious illness or death. We thought she would get some medicine and come home in a few days. We thought everything would go back to normal. Our family rallied around us. Aunts and uncles and grandparents. Everyone trying to keep things as normal as possible for me and my brother while the adults dealt with the crisis unfolding at the hospital. We stayed with different relatives, ate meals at their houses, tried to maintain our regular routines of school and homework and playing. But something was wrong. Even at 8 years old, I could feel it. The way the adults spoke in hushed voices when they thought we were not listening. The way they would stop talking abruptly when we walked into the room. The way they looked at us with this mixture of sadness and pity that made my stomach hurt even though I did not understand why. I asked my aunt what was wrong with Mom. She gave me a bright fake smile and said Mom just needed some rest and some medicine and she would be home soon. But her eyes told a different story. Her eyes were full of worry and fear. What I did not know, what no one told me until much later, was that my mother had been hiding a terrible secret for 2 years. 2 entire years of keeping something massive and life-threatening to herself. Not telling anyone. Not even my father. Suffering in silence because she did not want to worry people or be a burden. She had lost a kidney. 2 years before that terrible March, my mother had experienced serious kidney problems. The doctors told her that one kidney was failing and would need to be removed. She had the surgery. They took out the damaged kidney. And she never told anyone in the family. She made up some excuse for the hospital stay. Said it was something minor. Recovered at home without letting anyone know the truth. But here is the thing about kidneys. You can live with one. Lots of people do. It is not ideal, but one healthy kidney can do the work of 2. You just have to be careful. You have to monitor your health. You have to take care of yourself. My mother did not do that. Maybe she could not afford the follow-up care. Maybe she was too busy taking care of her family to focus on herself. Maybe she was in denial about how serious her condition was. I will never know the full reason. But she did not take proper care of that remaining kidney. And slowly, over those 2 years, it started to fail. By March 2008, that single remaining kidney was in critical condition. Barely functioning. Her body was filling with toxins that the kidney should have been filtering out. She was dying. And still, she told no one. Still, she kept the secret. Still, she smiled and said everything was fine even as her body was shutting down. Until she could not hide it anymore. Until she collapsed one day and had to be rushed to the emergency room. Until the doctors ran tests and discovered the horrifying truth. One kidney gone. the other one failing, her body in crisis, time running out. That was March 17th, the day they admitted her to the hospital. The day we learned, in pieces and fragments that the adults thought we were too young to understand, that our mother was very, very sick. The week that followed is mostly a blur in my memory. Staying at different relatives' houses, going to school and pretending everything was normal. Coming home to find adults with worried faces making phone calls and speaking in quiet voices. Asking when we could see Mom and being told not yet, soon, she needs to rest. My brother cried a lot that week. He was only 6 and did not really understand what was happening, but he knew something was wrong. He wanted Mom. He kept asking when she was coming home. The adults would distract him with toys or cartoons, but the question always came back. When is Mom coming home? I tried to be strong. I was the older brother. I felt like I needed to take care of my little brother and not add to the adults' worries by being upset. So I held it together during the day. But at night, alone in whatever guest room I was sleeping in, I would let myself feel scared. Would let myself imagine the worst. Would pray to God that Mom would be okay. On March 24th, a week after my mother was admitted to the hospital, I was staying at my aunt's house. My mother's sister. She lived about 30 minutes away from our house in a modest 2-bedroom apartment. She had set up sleeping arrangements for me in her living room. A blanket on the couch. A pillow. Not my own bed, but comfortable enough. I remember going to sleep that night feeling anxious. I had not seen my mother in a week. No one would take me to the hospital. They said children were not allowed in the intensive care unit. I missed her terribly. I wanted to hear her voice, to know she was okay, to have her tell me that everything would be fine. I fell asleep thinking about her, wondering when I would see her again, hoping it would be soon. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night. I do not know exactly what time it was at first. The apartment was dark and quiet. Everyone else was asleep. I lay there on the couch, disoriented, trying to remember where I was. Then it came back to me. My aunt's apartment. The living room. Sleeping here because Mom was in the hospital. I heard a sound from the kitchen. A familiar sound. The soft clink of a spoon against a mug. The quiet movement of someone trying not to make noise while preparing something. I knew that sound. I had heard it thousands of times throughout my childhood. Someone was making coffee. I sat up on the couch. My eyes were adjusting to the darkness. I could see a light on in the kitchen, not the bright overhead light, but the softer light of the small lamp my aunt kept on the counter. And I could see a figure moving around in there. My heart started beating faster. I knew who it was before I even saw her face. I knew from the way she moved, from the familiar rhythm of her preparing coffee, from the feeling in the air that only exists when your mother is nearby. I got up from the couch, walked quietly toward the kitchen, my bare feet making no sound on the carpet. I reached the doorway and looked inside. There she was, my mother, standing at the counter, wearing her familiar nightgown, the blue one with little flowers. Her hair pulled back like she always wore it at night. She was spooning instant coffee into a mug, adding hot water from the electric kettle, stirring it slowly. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost knocked me over. She was here. She was out of the hospital. She was okay. Everything was going to be fine after all. "Mom," I said. She turned and looked at me. Smiled. That gentle smile she always had. "Did I wake you?" I was trying to be quiet. "Why are you here?" I asked, walking into the kitchen. "Why did you leave the hospital? You are still sick. You should not be out." My mother set down her spoon and looked at me with the most peaceful expression I had ever seen on her face. "I am fine now," she said. Her voice was soft but clear. "I am totally fine. Nothing can hurt me anymore." Those words should have made me happy. Should have filled me with joy and relief. But something about the way she said them felt strange. Final somehow. Like she was not just talking about being released from the hospital. Like she was talking about something bigger than that. But the doctors, I started to say. They said you were really sick. They said your kidney was not working right. "Do not worry about that anymore," my mother said. She picked up her coffee mug and took a small sip. "Everything is okay now. I just wanted to make some coffee. You know I cannot sleep well at night." This was true. My mother had always been a light sleeper. She would often wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and be unable to fall back asleep. So she would get up quietly and make herself a cup of coffee and sit in the kitchen, thinking her thoughts, until she felt tired enough to try sleeping again. My father used to joke that she ran on less sleep than anyone he had ever met. Seeing her standing there in my aunt's kitchen making her midnight coffee felt so normal, so familiar. It was exactly what she would do at home. For a moment, I let myself believe that everything really was okay. That she really had been released from the hospital, that this nightmare week was over, and life was going back to normal. "Are you coming home?" I asked. "Can we go back to our house?" My mother smiled again. That same peaceful smile. "Soon," she said. "Everything will be clear soon. Go back to sleep now. You have school tomorrow." "Okay," I said. I wanted to hug her. Wanted to hold on to her and make sure she was real. But something stopped me. Some instinct I could not name. Instead, I just stood there looking at her, memorizing her face, the way she looked in the soft kitchen light. "Good night, my baby," she said. "I love you so much. Never forget that." "I love you too, Mom," I said. I walked back to the couch, climbed under my blanket. I could still hear her in the kitchen. The soft sounds of her drinking her coffee, moving quietly so she would not wake anyone else. Normal sounds. Comforting sounds. I fell back asleep feeling better than I had in days. Mom was out of the hospital. She said she was fine. Nothing could hurt her anymore. Everything was going to be okay. I woke up the next morning to voices. Loud voices. Urgent voices. Something was wrong. I opened my eyes and saw that the living room was full of people. My aunt. My uncle. Other relatives I recognized but whose names I could not remember in my groggy state. They were all talking at once. Crying. Hugging each other. Moving around with the frantic energy of a crisis. I sat up on the couch, looked around in confusion. What was happening? Why was everyone here? Why was everyone crying? My older brother and sister came into the living room. I had not even known they were in the apartment. They must have arrived early that morning. Their faces were red. They had been crying too. They saw me sitting on the couch and came over. "Get up," my brother said. His voice was rough. Strained. "Get up. We need to go." "Go where?" I asked. "What is happening?" "Just get up," my sister said. She was crying, tears streaming down her face. "Get dressed. We have to leave right now." I was confused, but I did what they said. I changed out of my pajamas into regular clothes. No one offered me breakfast. No one explained what was happening. They just rushed me out of the apartment and into a car. My brother and sister and me in the back seat. One of my uncles driving. My aunt in the passenger seat. Both of them crying silently. We drove for about 30 minutes. I kept asking where we were going. What was happening? Why was everyone crying? No one would answer me. They just told me to sit still and be quiet. that they would explain soon. The scenery outside the car window looked familiar. We were heading toward our own neighborhood, toward home. I thought maybe we were going back to our house. Maybe that meant Mom really was out of the hospital. Maybe that was why everyone was so emotional. Maybe these were happy tears. But the car did not stop at our house. It kept going, turned onto another street, pulled up in front of a building I recognized but had never been inside. The funeral home. My stomach dropped. I felt cold all over. No. No, no, no. This could not be happening. My brother and sister got out of the car, took my hands, started walking me toward the building. I did not want to go. I pulled back, tried to resist. But they held my hands firmly and kept walking. "Please tell me what is happening," I said. My voice sounded small and scared. "Please." My sister stopped walking, knelt down in front of me. Her face was destroyed with grief. She took both my hands in hers and looked me in the eyes. "Mom died," she said, her voice breaking on the words. "Mom died yesterday, at 10 o'clock at night. She is gone." The world tilted. I could not breathe, could not think, could not process what she was saying. "No," I said. "No, that is not true. I saw her last night. She was at Aunt's house. She was making coffee. I talked to her. She said she was fine." My sister's expression changed from grief to confusion. "What are you talking about? What do you mean you saw her?" "Last night," I said, the words tumbling out. "I woke up and she was in the kitchen making coffee. She said she was fine. She said nothing could hurt her anymore. She was there. I saw her." My brother and sister exchanged a look I could not read. My sister's grip on my hands tightened. "What time was this?" she asked quietly. "I do not know exactly," I said. "It was dark. Middle of the night. Maybe 2 o'clock. She was making her midnight coffee like she always does." My sister's face went pale. She stood up slowly, looked at my brother. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. "Come inside," my brother finally said. His voice was gentle but firm. "We will talk about this later. Right now we need to say goodbye to Mom." They led me into the funeral home, into a room where our mother's body lay in a casket. Family and friends gathered around, crying, paying their respects. I stood there looking at her body, wearing nice clothes, her hands folded, her eyes closed, so still, so completely, obviously gone. This was not the woman I had seen in the kitchen last night. This was just a shell, a body without the person inside. My mother was not here. She had not been here since 10 o'clock the previous night. That is what everyone kept telling me. She had died at 10 p.m., peacefully, in the hospital, with my father and some other relatives by her side. At 10 o'clock at night on March 24th, my mother's heart had stopped beating. Her failing kidney had finally given up. The toxins in her blood had overwhelmed her system. The doctors had done everything they could, but it was not enough. She was too sick, had waited too long to get help. Her body could not fight anymore. She died at 10 o'clock. But I had seen her at 2 in the morning, 4 hours after she died. I had seen her in my aunt's kitchen, making coffee, wearing her nightgown, smiling at me, talking to me, telling me she was fine, that nothing could hurt her anymore. 4 hours after she died, I had a conversation with my mother. The adults tried to tell me I had been dreaming, that in my grief and confusion, my mind had created a comforting vision to help me cope, that it was not real, that it was impossible. People who die at 10 p.m. do not show up making coffee at 2 a.m. That is not how death works. But I knew what I had seen. I knew I had been awake. I knew the difference between a dream and reality. I had walked from the couch to the kitchen, had stood in the doorway, had talked to my mother, had heard her voice, had seen her face. It was real. My aunt later told me something that made my blood run cold. She said that my mother used to visit her sometimes in the middle of the night, would come over late after everyone else was asleep. She struggled with insomnia, and sometimes driving to her sister's house and sitting in her kitchen drinking coffee was the only thing that helped. She had a key to the apartment, would let herself in quietly, make her coffee. Sometimes my aunt would wake up and come keep her company. Sometimes she would just let her sister sit alone with her thoughts. My mother knew that kitchen well, knew where everything was. The coffee, the mugs, the kettle. She had made coffee in that kitchen dozens of times over the years. It was familiar territory, comfortable, a place she went when she could not sleep and needed some peace. Maybe that is why she came back there. Maybe spirits are drawn to familiar places, to spots where they felt safe and comfortable in life. Maybe my mother's spirit, newly freed from her failing body, went to the place she always went when she needed comfort and peace. Her sister's kitchen, in the middle of the night, to make one last cup of coffee. And I happened to wake up, happened to be there, happened to see her, happened to have one final conversation with my mother after she had already died. I have spent years thinking about that night, analyzing it, trying to understand what happened and what it means. I am an adult now, old enough to know that the dead do not simply appear to make coffee in their sisters' kitchens. Old enough to understand that what I experienced defies all rational explanation. But I also know what I saw, and I know I was not the only one who felt something strange that night. My aunt later admitted that she had woken up around 2 a.m. that night, had felt a presence in her apartment, had almost gotten up to check the kitchen, but decided not to. She said she felt inexplicably peaceful, like someone she loved was nearby, watching over her. And the next morning, she found a mug in the sink, a mug that had not been there when she went to bed. A mug with coffee residue in the bottom. She said she assumed she had forgotten about it, that she had made coffee before bed and not washed the mug. But she could not really remember doing that. I know whose mug that was. I know who made that coffee. The funeral was hard, harder than anything I had ever experienced. Watching them lower my mother's casket into the ground, knowing I would never see her again, never hear her voice, never feel her hugs, never have her tell me everything would be okay, except I had seen her again. One more time. After she died, she had come back for one final visit, to make her midnight coffee one last time, to tell me she was fine, that nothing could hurt her anymore. I have told this story to very few people over the years. Most people react the way you would expect. They smile politely and suggest I was dreaming or confused or traumatized. They say that 8-year-olds have vivid imaginations, that grief does strange things to the mind, that what I experienced was not real, just a coping mechanism my brain created to help me deal with loss. But I know better. I know what happened that night. My mother died at 10 o'clock, and at 2 a.m. she came to say goodbye. Not to everyone, just to me. One last moment between a mother and her son. One last chance to tell me she loved me, that everything would be okay, that even though her body was gone, some part of her persisted. Some part of her could still reach across the divide between life and death to comfort her child. I do not know why I was the one who saw her. Maybe because I was young, and still open to experiences that adults have learned to dismiss. Maybe because I was at my aunt's house, the place my mother felt most comfortable outside her own home. Maybe because I needed it most. Needed that one last conversation. That reassurance that death was not the end. Or maybe there was no grand reason. Maybe it just happened. Maybe the rules we think govern life and death are not as rigid as we believe. Maybe sometimes, under the right circumstances, those we love can come back for just a moment. Just long enough to let us know they are okay. I miss my mother every day. The grief never truly goes away. You just learn to carry it. To live with the hole in your life where that person used to be. To function despite the sadness that never completely fades. But I also carry something else. A memory of that night. Of seeing my mother one last time. Of hearing her tell me she was fine. That nothing could hurt her anymore. Of knowing, with absolute certainty, that something of her survived beyond her body's death. That memory has sustained me through the years. Through the hard times. Through the moments when grief threatened to overwhelm me. I would remember her standing in that kitchen. That peaceful smile. That sense of absolute certainty in her voice when she said nothing could hurt her anymore. She was right, nothing could hurt her anymore. The kidney failure that ravaged her body could not touch her anymore. The pain and suffering were over. She was free, at peace, and she came back to tell me so. I am grateful for that. Grateful for one last conversation. One last I love you. One last moment of seeing my mother's face and hearing her voice. Even if it should have been impossible. Even if it defies explanation. Even if no one believes me. I know what happened. I was there. And that knowledge has shaped everything I believe about life and death and what comes after. I cannot prove it to anyone. Cannot offer evidence beyond my own memory and the testimony of an 8-year-old child. But I do not need to prove it. I know the truth. My mother died on March 24th, 2008, at 10 o'clock in the evening. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, she made one last cup of coffee in her sister's kitchen and said goodbye to her son. Both of these things are true. Both of these things happened. The dead can come back. Not for long, not for everyone. But sometimes, under the right circumstances, they can cross back over for just a moment. Just long enough to bring comfort. To deliver a message. To let us know they are okay. My mother did that for me. And I will carry that gift with me for the rest of my life. The knowledge that death is not the end. That love persists beyond the grave. That sometimes, just sometimes, those we have lost can reach back across the void to touch us one more time. I hope she is at peace now. I hope wherever she is, whatever comes after this life, that she is happy and whole and free from pain. I hope she knows how much I still love her. How much I still miss her. How much that final visit meant to me. And I hope that when my time comes, when I cross over to whatever waits on the other side, that I will see her again, that she will be there waiting, that we will have all the time we did not get in this life, all the conversations we never had, all the moments that were stolen from us. Until then, I carry her memory. I carry the lessons she taught me, and I carry the knowledge of that night, the night my mother came home one last time. The night I learned that death is not the end. The night I discovered that love is stronger than the grave. That is my story. That is what happened to me when I was 8 years old. That is the truth about the night my mother died and then returned. Believe it or do not. I know what I saw. And nothing anyone says will ever convince me otherwise. My mother came back to say goodbye. And I am grateful beyond words that I was awake to receive that gift. That final moment, that last conversation, that proof that whatever lies beyond this life, some part of us survives. Some part of us goes on. And sometimes, just sometimes, that part can come back to comfort those we left behind.